Thank you for joining me on a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin, and as you can see from my intro and the flags behind me, it is time to start the Stars and Stripes Forever Quilt Kit, a pattern by Fig Tree and Company. This is my first time making a quilt kit, and this is a generous size throw. It's going to finish at 58 by 71 inches, and it comes with everything except the backing fabric. So it will include the borders and the binding fabric, and it will be done just in time to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the United States being a country come this July. So I'm really excited to make this quilt. I noticed my t-shirt that I'm wearing here has an identical flag as the ones that I'm going to be demonstrating how to make, which I just thought was a funny coincidence. But I thought it would make sense to split making this quilt into a few videos. This video is going to focus on how to make the flag blocks. And then there are 5 different types of star blocks, and I thought I'd do stars in another video. And finally, a third putting it all together. So those will be some videos to look forward to coming up. But let's go ahead and start making the flag blocks. So I've got all my fabric pieces organized now by what it is they'll be making. I was a little confused when I first saw, there's a smaller piece of navy dot and then a larger piece. And then I saw, there's a couple cuts of gingham. I was a little confused until I looked at the back of the pattern and saw that they tell you what cuts go for the flag, the stars, the borders and sashing and so forth. And so they cut them according to the directions on the back. And I just had my little measuring tape handy to double check the sizes. And so I've labeled everything. And so since I'm making the flags first, I'm going to go ahead and put all the borders and star fabrics away in the box for now and just focus on these pieces.
One thing I am enjoying for sure about a kit is that the yardage is already cut to the size you need, so you're just dealing with smaller pieces for most of this, and so that just makes ironing a lot easier, and I can use my smaller cutting mat to cut the pieces, and so just that aspect alone makes this really nice to do. I've got all my pieces cut to make the flag blocks. And the nice thing is there's a lot of scraps left over. So this is all just for making the flags. And so I'll be able to add that to my scrap bin and be able to keep using this fabric that I really love. But I'm going to go ahead and start making the sawtooth star blocks for the flags. And so I'll be using the E pieces and the D pieces to make flying geese. All right, I'm going to start by drawing a diagonal line on the back of all my D pieces. Now, you could use diagonal seam tape on your sewing machine instead of drawing lines, or you could fold them in half diagonally and press to get your line. There's several ways you can do this, but I'm just going to use a pencil, just something that will show up on the wrong side of the fabric. All right, so now I'm going to do the sew and flip method. I'll use chain piecing. I'm just going to stitch along the line here, and then it'll get pressed, and then stitch along this line here, and it'll get pressed, and that will make my flying geese units. Now, normally with the sew and flip method, I would trim the bottom 2 layers a 1/4 inch away from the stitch line. But I've noticed with another Fig Tree and Company pattern that I've done, and so I don't know if she recommends this with every pattern or just certain ones, but she mentioned if the bottom fabric is lighter than the top fabric, to just leave it on, not trim it off, just to give your unit a little more structure or foundation. And so I've done it before with another quilt I've made, and it turned out just fine. I know that there could be some worry about bulk. I'm going to try it and leave
the bottom layers on just to, follow the pattern directions or recommendations here, and just see, because these are smaller flying geese. So I'll try it with one, and if it feels too bulky, I will trim away. But if it works out nicely, it does save that extra step of cutting, which is nice. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these flipped and pressed, and then I'll sew the other side on. All right, I've got all my flying geese, and I decided to keep all 3 layers on to keep the rectangular structure. And now I'm going to take these, and I'll demonstrate with one here. To make the star blocks, we're going to take 1 C square, put a flying goose on each side, and then take 4 F squares, and place those around. Like so. And so the way I'll sew is column 1 and 2 together first. So we'll sew these down, and these down. And when it comes to pieces like this, I like to sew, if there's intersecting threads, I like to sew with those on top. So as I'm stitching, I can make sure that my needle is going to hit just to the right of it. I just want to miss the tip there. And then when I press it open, it should really preserve that point nicely. So after those are all sewn, I'll press them open and then attach these 3 pieces. But to also speed up the process, I'm going to chain piece. So I'll be making 8 stars. So I'll have 8 of my squares, just 8 in each of these piles. So I'm going to go ahead and put those together in chain piece, and I should have 8 beautiful sawtooth stars in no time. I've got all my rows sewn together, and I ended up pressing the seams toward the sides that have the least amount of fabric. So for the first and third row, I pressed toward the outside. And then for the middle row, I pressed toward the inside, toward the main square. And that's going to help my pieces nest when I put the rows together. So originally I had planned to press them open, but I thought nesting would be more important. So what I'm going to do now is attach these 3 rows, and just like I mentioned before, when I pin these together, I'm going to put any intersecting points on top. So I have my intersecting threads here. I want to be able to see it and just sew just to the right, about a stitch right of that intersection point to preserve my points. So if one side doesn't have any intersecting threads, I just put the side up that has them. If both did, I'd use a pin and poke it through to keep the tips aligned, but this one is going to be simpler to do. And then I'll do the same thing when it's time to sew the bottom row on, and just watch for those intersection points. So I'm going to go ahead and complete these 8 sawtooth stars. I did press the seams open on my star blocks just because there were so many layers on one side due to not trimming away the flying geese layers. So the pattern doesn't say to press open, but I am, just because there aren't any seams I'm going to have to nest, and I just wanted these blocks to be a little flatter when I press them. All right, my 8 star blocks are done. They look very cute. They'll be nice little corners to the flags. And so now it's time to do some strip sets. I'm going to make 2 sets of strip sets, some shorter ones and long ones.
So for the shorter, I'm going to take my red G pieces and my cream I pieces, and there's going to be 4 in each set. So it's going to be a red, a cream, a red. I'm going to pick one that doesn't have dots, maybe this one, and another cream. And so these 4 will be sewn together. And some tips for sewing long strips would be to use lots of pins to hold them in place so they don't start slipping as you're sewing. When you sew, be careful not to pull or stretch them, and just go slow to keep that consistent 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to be pressing these open, so I like to backstitch on both ends just to help prevent the threads from unraveling a bit when they're handled. And so I will lay out my strips and just make sure that I'm not duplicating any pieces. I don't want too many polka dots, or I don't want to end up with 2 cherry pieces in the very end. So I'll just make sure that I set out all 15 of my sets to make sure that at the end I don't have a bunch of duplicates and I can rearrange if needed. It's a lot harder to do that once you start sewing. So 15 sets of these shorter sets of 4 strips, and I'm making 15 sets of the long strip sets. They'll be made of my red H pieces and 1 cream J strip in the center. I'll follow the same tips that I do with the short pieces, including having them all laid out ahead of time to make sure I don't have duplicates in my last sets. Both sets of strip units are finished, and so next is going to be to combine either one of my star blocks with the shorter strips, or one of the A floral squares to the left of the short strip set. And so I'll make 15 total, and once these 2 are connected, then the long strip set will be connected. So I'm going to use my design wall to just make sure I like the pieces that are being joined and position them where I want them to be according to the layout on the cover. I've laid out the blocks in a way that I like, making sure that the first row is starting with a star block and then a solid and a star, and it alternates that way. That's how the pattern had everything set up. But what I was trying to do was just make sure that with a red that I didn't have any of the same prints next to each other or right above or below each other. And it will just take too long to try to find the perfect combination. So that was really what I was looking for. If I have 2 of the same um, cream prints next to each other, I was okay with that because the cream is really low volume and I think it'll just blend in fine. If I had a block like this one that has 2 of the same reds in it, I just wanted to make sure that they weren't right next to each other, that they were spread out a little more. So that was really what I did to make sure that the red got distributed in a balanced way. I think this looks great. So I'm going to take a picture of this in case anything gets mixed up, and start assembling my flags.
I did want to point out, as just a final piece of advice when making blocks and strips like this, is to pay attention to fabric where the details have lines. Normally, I'm really good at doing that and intentional about my cutting, but I just dove in with this one, not noticing that the green fabric here, for example, was in a straight line, and the cherry fabric as well. And so what's happening is it's starting to go crooked. It's slanting downward instead of straight across. And so even though my seam line is straight, it kind of has a look of being crooked or wobbly. Same thing with the cherries over here. There's hardly any showing, and then it starts to show more and more the farther down we go, and then the ones toward the bottom are getting cut off. Now, part of why I just dove in is because it came with the amount of fabric that I needed, and I didn't know if there was going to be extra fabric or not. And so I just started trimming it, just anticipating that I'm not going to have a bunch left over. I do have some of each of these fabrics, so I probably will go back in and, at least for this block, I feel like this one's the biggest offender. Just swap out some pieces that are cut a little more carefully. The others I feel like aren't as noticeable, but this one just happens to have 3 blocks, and even this one isn't as bad. But these two are the ones that are just really bugging me. So I'm going to see if I have enough to swap them out, and then I won't show that in this video, but it's just something to be aware of. Normally I'd say don't point things like this out in your quilt, but on this channel, I like to show you what I've learned from it. So hopefully it helps you to keep these kinds of things in mind when you piece your blocks. So I decided I'm going to make all 5 styles of stars. You can choose some of the easier ones or the ones you like the most, but I thought I'm just going to go for it and do all 5. So we have the twinkle stars, the 4-patch stars, the sawtooth stars, the box stars, and the pinwheel stars. And so there's going to be an assortment of them grouped in 4s throughout the quilt, which will go underneath each of the flags. So that will be the next video. And then, like I said, in the 3rd video, we'll put the sashing strips and cornerstones and borders on. So it should be very beautiful. Can't wait to finish this one. I also have some progress to share on my Homespun Collective Block of the Month quilt. This is a pattern by Lo and Behold Stitchery, and this is the colorway that I mocked up on pre-quilt. I'll be making a Christmas quilt with the colors that I've selected. So for month 3, we're making star sprinkle blocks, and I actually did a test block this time around. I had some fabric left from the Year of Sewing Machines quilt that I just did, my border fabric here, and some of the white fabric, which is very close to the colors I'm using this month. And when I made this test block using a lot of strip piecing, I found that my seam allowances were just on the smaller side, and so I was ending up with pieces that were just a little wider, and it needed more trimming down, which, I want to be careful of with all these little pieces, because I don't want to lose, too much of my outer blocks when I trim, when really it's some of these middle blocks that might need the trimming. And so it's a good idea to make a test block just to see, do you need to make your seam allowances bigger or smaller? Get used to sewing those straight lines down the long pieces of fabric. We're sewing lots of width of fabric strips here. And so the test block helped me do a lot better, I think, on my actual blocks. But look how close they are. And coloring. These are the fabrics that I pulled. This one was a Kona Sage. This is a Riley Blake Bear Lake, but they're very similar. So these were the Star Sprinkle center blocks, and I made 2 of them. And then I also made 8 of the Star Sprinkle blocks. And so this one just doesn't have the blue center, and they're a little bit smaller. And then this quilt program also comes with patterns for mystery blocks to put together at the end of the 8 months to make a complementary throw size quilt that will go with the homespun quilt. And so this one was really simple to do. We just used the remnants of our strip sets and attached the 3rd color to the top and just cut them to size. So I have 2 that look like this and 2 that are a little wider apart here. So I'm really eager to see what this is going to be making. I think I'll put all the mystery block pieces together, and I'll show you the homespun blocks I've made so far so you can see them all together. But so far in month 1, we made the checkerboard and stripe blocks along with these little diamond and a square pieces. There's several of those. And then last month was all about making these green sawtooth stars. And so this month, of course, are the star sprinkle blocks that are going to go in between. So let me show you what it's looking like all together. So here are my pieces so far, kind of how all the colors are playing together. And it's kind of fun to see these new star sprinkle blocks under the sawtooth stars, because that's how they'll go in the pattern. But lots of greens and reds and cream off-white colors. I'm looking forward to month 4. There's going to be some new shapes and parts of the inner border that we'll be creating. So stay tuned for that. Here are all my mystery block pieces, and something I'm noticing is this size coming together a lot. Like these lower ones, they're all the same size. So I'm wondering if we're going to be making rows of different blocks, but there's different layouts within each month, and it'll have all the colors that are in my homespun quilt. So yeah, I'm just really curious. And then we have these smaller strips and some of these smaller checkerboards. So it's still very much a mystery of how this is going to go together. Well, I hope you're eager to see my Stars and Stripes Forever quilt come together. I know I am. I love these colors. It's such a cheery color palette. And if you enjoyed this video, liking and subscribing is a good way for future videos of mine to show up in your YouTube feed. So I always appreciate that. Take care, happy quilting, and I'll see you next time.